the judge in me is somebody I'm not going to get rid of. That judge is always going to be there. But that judge doesn't have to rule. That judge doesn't have to be the driver of my car. He can be a navigator, but not the driver. I'm the driver. And there are different components. I have different passengers in my car, so to speak. And so recognizing the judge when the judge is judging and say, oh yeah, you're judging this. Thank you for that judgment. Now I'm going to weigh it and proceed. And so I, to my surprise, was able over a period of a few years to decrease my judgmentalness about myself. And lo and behold, along with that came compassion with other people.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. I'm excited to welcome to the podcast today, Mark Poehner. Today, am I pronouncing the last name? I always say
good.
this. Okay. But today we're going to call him Marco because he goes by Marco as well. He lives between Cali. We were talking before, Cali of California and Cali, Colombia. So, so between the two Calis.
Yes.
So we're really excited to have you on. I'm excited to have you on, and I'm excited for the listeners to get to listen to all these different things. And when you decided that you wanted to be a guest, we were talking about what were the themes we were going to talk about. And there's two that are major in your life. And so I'm going to kind of give a snippet to the listeners. We're going to be talking a lot about your passion, about the carbon footprint that we have in our lives. And with that, the passion that you have of the regeneration of the Andean forests and the species that are there for extinction. And then the other topic you're really passionate about is teaching and facilitating effective communications with people, especially with children, without it being raised in coercion and what was the other word? And punishment, right? So that's the two passions. So we're going to see how we take the conversation into those directions. So welcome, Marco.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a pleasure for me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about both of these things, which actually are tied in one way or another, partially because everything is tied. Everything is linked. It's impossible really to disvinculate. And I think that a lot of the illness of our planet and of our species and all the damage we do to other species is a lack of recognition that we're all interconnected intricately.
Oh, I could not agree more. It's like getting your little toe. You don't realize how much you need that little toe, the little one, el chiquitico,
the little piggy.
The little piggy, until you like hit it or you break it. Then you realize, oh my gosh, we are all interconnected, even within our body, these parts that we don't even realize why they exist. And in our human experience and collective experience with other species and plants, everything, we all are interconnected and we all affect the other. So excited to hear this. So let's talk a little bit more about you and your upbringing, and then we'll navigate as to why these two areas of your life are your passion. So you were mentioning you were born in the States, but went back to Colombia at the age of 5. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So take us into that. How was it, growing up in Colombia?
My father was born in Colombia. He was born in Pereira, Caldas. not Pereira, Risaralda. Risaralda had not been formed. I remember when Risaralda became independent in 1967. So he was born in Pereira of missionary parents, and they had a certain determination to convert all the Catholics into evangelical Christians. Um, I think there are some inconsistencies that were, of course, there are inconsistencies. At any rate, I suspect that I might have some great uncle somewhere in Pereira. But my grandfather had to leave Pereira. Part of it was also because it was in 1920s. Uh, uh, he had a couple of sons there, and one of them died of tuberculosis. My father got tuberculosis, and they decided to come back to the United States to pursue treatment. So my father grew up in a few years in Florida, and then they wound up going down to Argentina again as
Missionaries
missionaries.
again.
And so my father somehow or the other kept his Spanish, and then they had lost everything in a cyclone in Argentina, and they wound up going back to the west side of Florida, Tampa, ironically knocking down a forest in order to plant watermelons and stuff. So my father was a lumberjack, and
So
and
your father is the reason that now you're trying to be very cautious about your carbon footprint.
well, in part, I think it's a very good illustration of the generational changes that are occurring. And I'm 66 years old now, born in 55. I grew up in Cali from age 5, January 6, 1961, till June 9, 1972. And I wound up identifying as a caleño thoroughly. I mean, to the extent that my parents put me in Colegio Americano when I first started school. I learned how to read before going to school because I went to church. And so my mother would sit next to me and point at the words in the hymn book. So I learned how to read music and words at the same time, in Spanish. And um, then over the first few years, I lost my English. And so my parents became not just me, my siblings too. There were 4 of us at the time. I have a twin sister, um, and 2 older brothers. For some reason, I mean, I suspect that it was because I was very delicate of health, probably because I was the blondest one, so the sun had the biggest effect on me. Yo era el monito, I was the monito in Cali. And so,
And
um,
mono in other countries, mono means like monkey, but in Colombia,
yes,
mono means blondie, like blonde. So
well,
anybody that's American, even if you're not actually blonde, by the
yeah,
way, even if you're not blonde,
yeah,
they'll still call you mono because you're white, right?
yeah. Well, the thing is, there's a takeoff on that because from the origin of the word, it also means doll. So,
Oh,
un mono es un muñeco. So,
okay.
interestingly, the word is used in a pejorative way in Central America, um, with people that are dark, and
Mm,
Afro descendants are sometimes pejoratively called mono by the people that are not of African
more
origin in
Caucasian. Uh-huh.
Guatemala, Honduras. Um, but at any rate, I grew up with a lot of discomfort, and partially, I mean, I had amoebic dysentery for 7 years straight, and from the time I was 5, and so I had terrible stomach aches, and I would cry. And then I also had some sort of problem with my legs, so there were times I couldn't walk, and my legs hurt a great deal, so I would cry, which is what a little boy uh, does. I don't think I have to make excuses for it. Um, and I also wound up, I think, because of the tremendous dehydration from the dysentery, that I had terrible migraines, and so um, I would cry, And this resulted, for some reason, in my older brother, bless his heart, uh, he bullied me. And interestingly, I was not able to confront him about the bullying until I was in my 50s.
Oh,
It
wow.
was part of my processing. You know, I stopped talking to him for 7 years. And then one day I reflected and I said, no, Marco, you got to talk to your brother. You can't just cut him off. And so I called him and I told him, I said, there's a reason for this. And he confessed right away. He said, yep, I'm a bully. And then he said, what can I do to make up
Mm.
for it? And so I I said, well, uh, I tend to have a very, very low self-esteem. I feel very bad about myself. The effect of the bullying was that I always felt insufficient. I've never been smart enough. I've never been good looking enough. I've been
This
almost
is what you
invisible.
thought there. That's when you thought that in your 50s when you were talking to your brother. That's
Yeah,
when you were telling him.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I realized it as a 50-year-old man that I had a major problem with my self-esteem, and that it had to do with not being accepted as a child. And so I would spend all my time on the street. And we lived across from Edificio Venezolano when it was first built, or let's say 3 years after it was built. So my first friends were refugees from the basically the explosion of August 7, 1957, I think it was, um, in which 7 trucks of dynamite exploded and took out 1/4 of the city then. And so I lived
I'm
with
learning. I'm learning something about the history of our country because I didn't know that part.
the history of our country is
Yeah.
fascinating and terrible.
Hmm.
And, you know, so when we get into grief, I believe that Colombia is a country that is constantly in grieving and has not been able to process it.
Mm.
And I think that fairly recently, with the hope for the peace accord that was signed 5 years ago, many of us believed we were going to be able to go through the grieving process, leave it behind, and begin to take steps forward in life. But as a nation, uh, I cry for Colombia, literally. Uh, but I also do for the states because again, the interconnectedness, one of the most devastating things of the last 50 years of war, which are the only ones that journalism in the United States accepts as, they say, oh, civil war of the last 50 years. I said, wait a minute, I was there in 1961. I saw people killed in front of me, you know, even as a child. And then every day in the newspaper, there were photographs of people with their throats slit and their tongues hanging out and their bodies cut open and children that were
Oh.
killed. And it was a horrible La Violencia, and at least 200,000 people killed each other off, led by the conservative government, and then wound up creating circumstances that led to further marginalization of the people who were poor, who had to leave their homes. And I grew up with these people. My father went back as a missionary. He went a little ahead of the family in 1960, and in 61 brought the rest of us down a few months later. And he was somebody who was dedicated to serving the poor, the disenfranchised, the refugees. And so he would go into the jungle, um, literally. I mean, we would spend at age 11. He began taking me because my mother told my father, uh, Alden, you better start taking Marky with you because he's spending too much time by himself on the street. She thought I was on the street in front of the house. I was walking all around Cali, or I would get on
Mm.
the back of a bus, sneak on the back of a bus, and then the chauffeur would see me and say, "Hey, Monito, come this way," and I'd go sit up front on this box next to the chauffeur and travel around the city, and then I'd get off somewhere and walk from there. And I got to know the whole of Cali of that time, which was only 660,000 people at that time. Um, it's now, I think, a lot closer to 3 million.
Mm-hmm.
But I would walk from Santa Rita to Juanchito. You know, I swam across
Wow.
the Rio Cauca, almost drowned in it when I was 8.
This is at the 8 years old. You were just going like that, and you lived in one of the as missionaries. You didn't go and live in an affluent neighborhood
No, we
in
did
Cali.
not.
You lived within one of the poorest neighborhoods
I
of
wouldn't say
the
one of the
city.
poorest.
Poorest?
I'd say
Okay,
it was kind of, it was certainly what we call un barrio obrero, a working class
okay, working
neighborhood.
class. Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah, which was, blue collar working class. There were
yeah,
some people who were entrepreneurial. There always are, fortunately. And
yes,
so I also had friends that kind of moved up the economic ladder. But I have friends that I grew up with whose houses I slept in and who slept in my house. And they live close to the Rio Cauca, in Alfonso Lopez or Barrio Siete de Agosto.
yeah.
So,
Which these are when you're talking about, just to give people that are listening, if they're English speakers or from the states, the when you live near the river, there's more cause of a lot of flooding happen. So a lot of these neighborhoods that are built alongside end up having a lot of flooding and things like that too,
yes,
right? A lot of
yeah,
that happens. So,
that's part of it.
um,
The other thing is that
yeah.
the infrastructure in most Latin American cities is quite to the contrary of the infrastructure of the cities in the United States. So during the 40s and 50s, they started building after the war, building cities in North America with suburbs. And so the better off people would move to the suburbs.
Hmm.
In Latin America, our cities, the infrastructure was the other way around. The rich people lived closer to the center of town. And to this day, you can go to Cali and go to Barrio San Antonio and find incredibly wealthy homes with a rather modest uh, front. Or you can go to, eventually, they built suburbs like Ciudad Jardín in the
Hmm.
1960s, 70s, and especially when the Colombian mafias, the cartels, started uh, having no way to spend enough money. So they built new suburbs for themselves,
Hmm.
um, and also legitimate industrial people.
So
It's a
let me try guiding here the conversation, because my gosh, there's so much resource. So one of the things then for you is having experienced one, living in another country, seeing the violence firsthand,
yeah,
in that country, seeing that process of grieving, experiencing your own grief as well, with the aspect of even with the bullying and your own inner turmoil, and confronting your brother when you were in your 50s. That takes a lot of bravery, by the way, Marco, to be able to speak up, especially as an adult, and confront those things. So kudos to you for
that's that's
realizing that
interesting.
and
That
stepping
I
up.
never really thought of it as bravery. I thought of
Courage,
it
yeah.
as an act
Dig
of
into.
love. I
Oh,
I
that's beautiful too.
I have to love myself. I have to make it right, and that
Yes.
includes making it right with my brother. It means talking to him about something that is hurtful, that has been hurtful. And the thing is,
Mm,
we have struck up a wonderful relationship since then.
that's
I
beautiful.
love him profoundly, and uh, we we talk with frequency.
That is
So
so awesome. So yeah, you know what? That's so true, because those things can be interconnected. Because even with vulnerability, people sometimes think vulnerability is weakness, but vulnerability is really courage. So in vulnerability here, of you being able, because of that act of love, to share with your brother, not act of love to yourself, like you were saying, acknowledging that you were feeling this way, and your upbringing of insecure, how you felt about yourself was a lot rooted in your bullying as a kid, um, then that act of love and being vulnerable enough to share with your brother, that does take courage, and that's kind of where the
yeah, yeah,
courage and
yeah.
bravery so it's
It,
all intertwined.
that's
Now, how? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to comment on that because I have a daughter who's 24 years old, and we talk a lot. My kids and I talk a lot. I have 3 kids, and we'll spend 2, 3, 4 hours a week, one-on-one conversations about whatever. I mean, the human existence, or art, or the woods, or whatever. And one of my daughters says, you know what I don't like about most men is that they're never vulnerable. They're always on guard. And she uses a sexual imagery and will say, they're afraid of being penetrated. She said one of the things I like about gay men is that they're vulnerable. So that was a few years ago conversation, and I thought, what does it mean for me to be vulnerable?
Mm.
And for me, it means to be available for intimacy, and that means pretty much. I mean, usually, particularly at my age, I'm just mostly on the emotional intimacy and spiritual intimacy. Um, I tend to live a rather caste life. I'm a bit of a hermit, uh, but anyhow, the issue of vulnerability is very important
Mm-hmm.
because I think in order for us to really be in touch with ourselves, we have to become vulnerable to
Yeah.
other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it allows us to see ourselves, like truly see ourselves by being vulnerable, right? And see others too in that vulnerability. And one of the things I think in those when you were talking about the intimacy, in order to really have intimacy in terms of that, it's really about connection, right? And to be able
yes,
to see someone and to be seen. um so that's the part I think that makes it, so important. Okay, so now let's talk then about how did the passion, or do you want to go ahead and talk about your children? Let's talk about your children since you mentioned them. Let's talk about this aspect of your passion about this communication and the way of child rearing, and where that passion came from of
that's
making sure
that's
that
gonna that's gonna take me back to the past again
yeah,
because
well,
uh,
that's the thing. A lot of the things, this goes again back tied to how the podcast being titled "Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between" is because of the fact that things in our life end up being catalysts for some sort of growth or change. So,
yes,
like you said, whatever you experienced shifted how then you are now as a parent. So, go ahead and
yes.
take us
Well, I,
into that.
I because I grew up in a neighborhood which was a working class neighborhood and which was everybody was of color. I mean, I was unquestionably the blondest kid in the neighborhood, and the next was my brother. you know, or my brother said they were fair skinned. They had what they call Caucasian features and that sort of thing, just like me. And so we were notorious, very easy to pick out. Well, it turns out that at that time, early 60s, there were refugees from Spain that included priests that were communist priests and so on that had to leave. And coincidentally, a couple of them got assigned to the church up the street from where I lived. And my father had built, he was very pragmatic. So he built a chapel for church for people to come to. He built it in the most geographically central part of Cali he could get, which is Barrio Cien Palos. Nobody knows where that is hardly. It's inside basically a Barrio Belalcázar. So
Mm-hmm.
very central. And it turns out that these Catholic priests, even though they were either anarchists or communists that had to leave Spain or
Spain.
Franco would
Mm-hmm.
kill them, they were also tremendously Catholic. So I found out later when I was 15 years old and I got to know some of the boys of my neighborhood better, that the priest would send them to break the windows of our house and to throw mud at our house and to interrupt the religious proceedings and to beat me up. And so I grew up very violently, fighting or avoiding fights on a daily basis. And one of my coping mechanisms was to become more aggressive than the aggressor. So I began uh, picking fights. I began if I'd see somebody look at me, I'd say, "What you looking at? You know, you want me to split you open or something?" And it was And then the other one was learning how to use my wits to humiliate and to belittle people so much that they wouldn't dare attack me. So those were coping mechanisms. And then at the same time, I was beginning to go, or I had spent already a few years going into the jungle with my father, and I started hunting. So I had a gun at age 11, and I would hunt. And the only thing with my father was you kill it, you eat it. So I ate a lot of different kinds of animals. Interestingly, at age 16, another one of my brothers said, I don't understand hunting. If we're going to eat meat, why do we have to kill wild animals? We have plenty of cows that we grow. Um, and I thought about that for about a year, and I quit carrying a gun, no more guns. And I picked up a camera. And and then for a few years, I would try to take the best photographs in the woods or wherever. And then I realized I was spending so much time concentrating on trying to take a good photograph that I wasn't enjoying what I was seeing to the fullest extent. So that was a beginning of a conversion of sorts that led me to pacifism. I also, at a young age, read some Adam Smith and some Karl Marx and Engels and Trotsky and so on. And I started thinking about politics and political philosophy and so on, because it was a time of turmoil in Cali. So I was in the demonstrations in Cali, 1970, 1971, that led up right after Frente Nacional was finishing up, and the election was won by Rojas Pinilla, was stolen by him, and so on. So that's when M19 was formed based on Movimiento 19
as a
de Abril.
guerrilla. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's the guerrilla movement.
I was in a bit of a quandary because I tended to always side with the disenfranchised, with the poor. I mean, I would have gotten along real well with Pope John the 23rd, but uh, I also became persuaded that violence was not going to be the means for a relevant a revolution of any sort. And so I was kind of caught between my Christianity on the one hand, pacifism on the other, recognizing that Christianity was not really a pacifist religion by any means. Quite the contrary. Even, but I don't want to get into too much history there. But
That could
even,
be for another. That could be a whole other chapter
oh yeah, yeah. Well, I
of
wound
interview.
up
I'm sure.
spending many years studying the history of
Of
Latin
religion
America, and
and
got a
the
degree
influence
in
of
it and so on.
religion. Yeah.
But um, so to me, I was a man of a violent mouth. I was good at communication. I became a journalist, um, and I wrote for newspapers in Los Angeles, and but eventually I wound up getting into teaching. I was frustrated with journalism because I didn't feel that one could do in-depth um, investigation and give historical background to the present day conflicts. And particularly when I covered the Malvinas War in 1982, Falklands, Malvinas, and I realized this is just, people aren't going to understand why this war is going on, because the historical background is completely omitted. And so it became more of a propaganda war, which was won by the British. But in the meantime, I decided to study. That I said, you know what, I really enjoy studying, so I went back to college and worked on a graduate degree. But I also began to question my religion at that time, because I was kind of between Protestant on the one hand, and I had studied theology and gotten into uh, Orthodox Christianity. And at the same time, I was very interested in liberation theology. And it was very difficult. I could reconcile those in my mind, but eventually I couldn't reconcile all the very uh, different contradictions until I opted out. I also realized that a lot of my internal conflict was due to the inability to reconcile uh, my religious beliefs to the reality of life that I lived. And I also recognized when I became a teacher that I was too harsh. And I also recognized that I had a problem with my anger, that I was quick to anger, and so I pursued therapy. And eventually, I got married. I kind of late. I was almost 40. I mean, I got married the first time when I was 32, but that didn't last. And so when I married the mother of my children, I was 39 and a half, or 39, and my daughter was born when I was almost 40 years old. And I had sworn I would never spank my kids because I used to get spanked. I mean, I'd get spanked 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. Sometimes I'd get whipped. My mother lost her temper. My father was very measured. He'd say, okay, this what you did, this one deserves 5 lashes, or this one deserves 3 lashes, or such. And he was very calculating and very careful about not over spanking me, with a couple of exceptions. Um, so when my eldest daughter was 7, I realized that I had a default mechanism that was not letting me do what I wanted to do, which was to raise my child in a loving and rational way. And at that time, I was also going through a divorce. And the therapist said, Marco, you got to study communication, interpersonal communication with Selwa Said. And I was too arrogant for a year. And then she had a heart attack and decided to retire. And she called me in one last time and said, Marco, I have one request. Take classes with Selwa Said.
So what is the name of this? Selva
Selwa.
Said?
Selwa is a
Sel
personal name. Selwa. And the last name is Said.
Said.
It's an
Mhm.
Arabic
Yeah,
name.
I do know that. Yeah.
She was
Selva Said.
family to
Interpersonal
Edward.
connection, interpersonal connections, you said?
Interpersonal relationship building.
Okay.
She called her course Effective Communication and Relationship Building. And I stayed with her for 17 years. I At first, I was like brass. I couldn't listen, but somehow or the other it broke through in the first conference of about 3 days. And I said, there is some richness here that I really would like to tap into. And she had 3 levels of skills that she taught, interpersonal skills for how to listen actively without interrupting or interfering with other people, and how to talk in a way that was uh, easy for another person to listen to, how to set boundaries, how to set limits without injuring the other person, with complete respect for whoever one is talking to. And I thought, yes. And also, that included not judging. And I said, well, how can I not judge? And she said, don't judge yourself. And I said, well, how can I do that? And she said, practice. And it was a very frustrating answer for me. I said,
Mm-hmm.
practice. And so I learned more to meditate in my own way, and take this in. And I realized the judge in me is somebody I'm not going to get rid of. That judge is always going to be there. But that judge doesn't have to rule. That
Mm.
judge doesn't have to be the driver of my car. He can be a navigator, but not the driver. I'm the driver. And there are different components. I have different passengers in my car, um, so to speak. And so recognizing the judge when the judge is judging, and say, oh yeah, you're judging this. Thank you for that judgment. Now I'm going to weigh it and proceed. And so I to my surprise, was able over a period of a few years to decrease my judgmentalness about myself. And lo and behold, along with that came compassion with other people. And so the application of that was when I'm talking to my daughter from age 7 on, I said, uh, I'm not going to punish you anymore. No more time out. Definitely no spanking. And I'm going to learn to talk to you even when I'm frustrated or something. It's not your problem that I'm frustrated. It's my problem that I'm frustrated. So I'm going to learn how to deal with my frustration. And it's going to take some time because I have to learn a whole new way of
Wow.
processing my thinking. And
You had to
sometimes I,
practice. You were gonna practice. Like, just like you
exact,
had to practice the non-judgment, you were
yeah,
going to practice this new way of being and reprogramming yourself by practicing.
yeah. Well, sometimes I would get so stuck. I mean, I didn't know how to say it. I'd be driving my
Yeah.
kids home from school and they start quarreling with each other about, putting their foot up on the chair in front of them
Oh
or
gosh.
whatever
Yeah.
kids argue
I know
about.
those. Yeah. I know those.
And I would say something like, it's hard for me to drive with the argument going on. And at one time, my kids both reacted, or two of them that were quarreling, said, "Dad, why do you talk so funny? Just talk normal." I said, "You want me to talk normal like I grew up talking?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, shut up until we get home." And
So, the fact that the
they said,
talking in a calm way was, like, weird, but the shut up was the normal.
and so my kids said, "No, Dad, keep practicing." And
Ah.
I got to tell you, over the years, I became a little less slow. I still ponder my words a great deal, and sometimes people think I'm slow, as in, just
Processing, as if it's like that it's taking, but for you, it's because you're still processing how to speak, not that it's that you're like, "Okay, how do I say this in a way that is calm?" You're still rethinking how you're going to express yourself.
I'm
Yes?
actually going further than that.
Oh, I
I,
w ho
I'm
okay.
listening to what the other person is saying and asking myself what is meant by what is being
Mm,
said and what's the impact of that on me, and if it's appropriate for me to express the impact at this moment, or should I express that impact later on. So I'm
mm,
very deliberate, very measured, um,
mm. That's so
sometimes.
good. Deliberate being deliberate and measured. I like those 2 words. It's something I gotta learn.
Oh, I'm
I'm
still learning it. And I tell you, I had 17 years with Selwa Saeed. She was adorable. She was she didn't get the polio vaccine on time, so she had uh, polio as a kid, and she was interned in a special institution that some very benevolent ladies set up for children that it was called the Institute for Crippled Children in New York City. And it turned out that everybody at that institute was tremendously compassionate and never once raised their voices at children.
mm,
And so Selwa learned it from age 6 to 12. She was interned. And she said when she went home, she would hear her parents saying things like, shame on you, and, hitting spanking them and so on. But at the institution, she was never punished and never belittled. And so
mm,
she wanted to teach people. She started out with parent effectiveness training and then decided that we also have to work on the parents, on our own relationship with one
with
another
ourselves.
and with ourselves.
Mhm.
And that's when she began developing, and she went to courses all over the United States on interpersonal communication, uh, and on nonviolent communication with Marshall Rosenberg and so on, and traveled around the world. And she also wound up having a change of belief system. She wound up going to India and became involved in Jainism, but she never once spoke about it. I asked her about it in private conversation. She never ever brought it into her skill workshops, her communication skills. Extremely respectful of other people's where
Beliefs.
we're at. And again, to me, the model of that, the respectfulness. She never taught respectfulness as a skill. She taught it by example. And I
That's
determined
the
that's what I have to do with every single one of my students,
mhm.
besides my own three children, is consider that here are people that are of equal value to myself intrinsically, that are just less equipped with experience, less equipped with the skills needed to juggle the things we juggle in our minds. And I have a duty to honor that value in them when I address them in a way to improve their skills, to teach them something, to even potentially guide them. Although even guidance can border on disrespect, I think. Unsolicited advice, uh, questioning, psychoanalysis. It's not my part to do that. I can do that, but that's for me inside myself. Uh, I have to be tremendously respectful of other people and their where they're at. So I began practicing that, and I stopped all forms of coercion with my children. No timeout, nothing, no regaños, no scolding. There were times I got frustrated and I got close, and I said, I need a timeout.
Yeah,
So
take ourselves. I would remember clocking myself in the closet. Mommy's on a timeout. Really, like when they were little, just so that I could be able to like manage where the Hulk, I would call it the Incredible Hulk that
yeah,
lived inside
yeah,
of me, where that was going. I'm like, I need really. I'm like, let me be here. It's for your own protection.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's beautiful how children. I mean, when you say that, what's their response? Is
They still be
yeah,
knocking on the
yeah,
door. I'm like,
mom,
no,
go,
really.
please, go,
No,
go.
mine were so little they didn't
Oh,
understand. I'm
okay.
like, "But why are you in there?" I'm like, "No, no, no, please let me." Yeah, they'd still wanna
Yeah,
be I'm like,
and
"No, I need space. I need space."
yeah, yeah. I need a timeout, and that's where
Yeah.
I again will go to where how everything's interconnected. Because I
Yes.
think for an adult to be left by himself or herself, usually by herself with the children, is an isolation that is not natural. It's not normal. It's not healthy. And so here's a mother stuck with one, two, three children in the house with numerous incidents throughout the day, sometimes one after the other for the whole day,
Mhm.
in which judgments have to be made about what should I do, how do I handle this, and I got to get this done in the meantime, and there's nobody there to back it up,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so I think how we raise children is something that totally needs to be revamped.
But it also like what you're saying right there too, it probably of course changes based on the cultural components of how children are raised. Like in your what you were describing is how I raised mine because I was here in the States. So I was who cooked, who cleaned, who took care of the kids, everything,
Right.
right? But if I was in Colombia, it might have been a little different. If that's not, I didn't grow up with my mom being the person that cooked. And so the type of activities that I would do with my mom were different. She could probably actually spend quality time focused doing something with us a little differently than what I was able to do when I was raising my kids because my focus was on three things, four things at the same time, right? Cook, this can't burn, you can't climb on this and fall or
Yeah.
this, whatever, right? So it does shift on that. And I'm sure in other cultures in which maybe it's more community based, more people, more than one person live like homes in which multi generational homes. So there's
Right.
others that live there that help. with
Yes.
that. So
Yeah.
there's a whole
There's
different
that. And
layers. Yeah,
there's also the class system in Colombia, which
correct.
is a
Yeah,
caste system.
right.
And
We don't call it that, but it is. Yeah, basically that.
and so
It's
the
a caste.
many people that are well to do are raised by a maid, not by their mother. Their mother
Right.
is out doing other things, and there were maids in our house too, although the arrangements were different because
Mhm.
of it being an evangelical missionary thing. There were certain exchanges of, let's say, we we would give an education to somebody, but then she would help with cooking or something
With
like
cook,
that.
yeah, something like that. So, okay, so then this all became one of your passions, and this is something before we go into talking a little bit about the your passion now about the carbon footprint and all these other aspects. This is something you also educate people and do workshops on as well, correct? With the parenting component and communication.
I
So,
I'll put it this way: I have done it prior to
mhm,
retirement, and I've done it voluntarily in Colombia at my nature reserve. Uh, the difficulty in retirement has been scheduling,
mm,
both in the United States and in Colombia, to be able to set up, because my mentor died about a year and a half ago. But before she died, she was losing her mental faculties over let's say 3 to 5 years. So I was kind of guiding the workshops, um, or I was one of the people guiding the workshops, and these were once a week um, for several years. I mean, for me, it was 17 years of study with her,
mhm,
and then I asked her, "Would you please give develop a workshop on how to raise children and how to teach children, uh, a workshop for parents and for teachers?" And she did that, and so we did 3 years of that. And I wound up teaching parenting classes and so on at the school where I taught. I also taught amongst basically there it was diet was one thing, and then raising children with without coercion, with due respect. And there'd be people that say, "Well, I believe spanking is necessary. I was spanked. I came out okay." And say, "Okay, all right." And by the way, is it okay if I ask you a personal question? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. So, when's the last time you visited your dad?
mm.
And invariably, the people who got spanked and that turned out all right, they visited their dad 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I said, "Is that what you want?" Because if you're using the same mechanism, you're gonna have the same results. So for me, I believe that as parents or as adults, not just parents. I mean, you might not have children of your own, but you have other children in your life, and some people try to reduce that number to a minimum. They don't want to see their nephews and nieces. They don't like little children, and I was kind of like that when I was a journalist. I thought, no, I don't want anything to do with kids. And when I started teaching, I taught adults before I taught kids. And I was persuaded by somebody who was becoming an elementary school teacher to become an elementary school teacher. So it's been a process for me, but I believe
Mm.
all our society needs to learn how to communicate. And in Colombia, a country that we can say is at least 500 years of violence, um, I think a lot of it stems from even how we talk to our children, how children are reprimanded or belittled, demeaned. Uh, este culicagao, what a disrespectful way to refer to a
Mhm,
child.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so it's profoundly part of our culture. Now, I think that we have very similar attitude to nature. We have grown up. We have been imbued with belief systems, religious and philosophical, that have man versus nature, and the concept that we're supposed to exercise dominion over nature and over the world, and we've gotten very good at that. Except that we do it by killing it. And since I grew up going into the jungle to accompany my father where he was doing his missionary uh, work, and I would go hunting and so on, but I would also make friendships with the people in the jungle. And if there were other children, I would become friends with them and so on. And but I fell in love with the forest, and from the very very first time I went in, the smell of the forest is just uh,
Tierra mojada, like that
yeah, there's
wet
actually a
dirt
name
kind of
for
smell.
it.
There is, but I don't remember.
Yeah,
But but it is a very, it's that the black kind of dirt when it would, and there's some people that are more sensitive to that smell. In my house, when it would rain, you know how tenemos esos patios interiores en algunas de las casas, like those
sí,
inside
sí,
kind of patios where it rain. So in my house, when it would rain, I could that smell of that earth. I actually, for me, it actually, I didn't actually like that smell, but I had a different reason. Mine I associated with that humidity because I had asthma growing up. There
uh-huh.
was something about when it would rain and the smell of of that wet earth, dirt, that then
Well,
somehow or another in my brain I would associate to actually afterwards getting asthma attacks or things like. So it was kind of like not a smell that I per se was like
yeah,
fond of.
in the jungle, it's a little different though,
Different?
because
Okay.
yes, because in the city, what you're getting is the water is striking the dust for the first time, and that dust is a composite of shattered dirt, but not just that. It's got pollen in it. It's
True,
got
true.
a little bit of lichens, which is kind of a symbiotic relationship between algae and fungi, and so you're getting particles that, in your case, you're allergic to.
Mm,
Uh, when I'm in the jungle, I smell the muskiness of the animals.
mm,
I smell the humid soil that is basically humus. It's leaves that are rotting and transforming into soil. And to be able to kind of carry a scent, um, and then my own scent, because after hours of trekking through
being in the
jungle,
jungle,
I
right.
began to smell like other animals,
Mm,
and with a distinct human smell because we have a different diet and so on. But um, to me, the jungle woke up a different love.
mm,
And at some point, I recognized that that it was disappearing, and I had decided to hunt for animals without any equipment, just see the animal and go home satisfied.
mm,
Fill my heart. And most of the time, it's not animals. Most of the time, it's plants, unless one is considering all the beautiful uh, little creatures that entomologists are fascinated by. Many different insects. I mean, in a tree, a mature tree in Colombia, you can have 600 species of beetles living on one tree, and that's just species of beetles. That's not talking about the other, wormy
animals that are
things
there,
and so
yeah.
on. So um, the incredible biodiversity of Colombia, I'm in love with it. I've
Mm.
always been in love with it. So it's now um 61 years of love for the forest in Colombia. And I
So
also always
when
fell in
you
love with the farallones de Cali. We always had a view of the farallones of the, in English, they hit farallons. And interestingly, the farallons that we know about in the States are islands off the coast of California and Washington and so on. And then I think Reunion Island, which I want to visit, has farallones very similar to our own. But
Mm.
uh, eventually, I always wanted to go up to the Farallones. And I also started having a recurring nightmare that that a road was being built from Cali to up behind the Farallones, and it would go all along the Farallones behind, and now the Farallones would no longer be wild. And it was a recurring nightmare. I haven't had it for quite a few years, and maybe it's because I've been reforesting that area for the last 32 years. Uh, Much of the well, where I bought the farm when I went back to teach at Colegio Bolívar, uh, I had an opportunity. I was invited on a hike up to the Farallones, and I went. And on the way back down, the guy said, "Why don't you? Why don't let's go visit that old man over there? The candle's still on." And we went, knocked on the door, and they opened and gave us agua panela to drink. And I wound up negotiating the farm with him that very same night. I had no
Wow.
idea. I thought I was going to buy a house in San Antonio with my retirement funds from California and set up an ice cream shop in San Antonio, which I think was a good idea, but somebody else has done that probably. Uh, and I wound up buying that piece of land in order to conserve the regrowth of the forest and to plant more.
How do you
And
access it? How do you have to walk up to get to
yeah,
where you're
it's
slotted?
not that far. It's only 400 meters from the end of the
So
road.
you park you like if you're driving there, you park there and then you just walk up all the way up to
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
From Colegio Bolívar, you go up
From
Panse así por
Colegio
Panse para
Bolívar
arriba.
all the way up to there is 9 kilometers, which I
Mhm.
walked many times.
And Colegio Bolívar, for those listening, that's the school that I graduated from and that Marco's mentioning that he worked at for a
I
few
also
years as well.
graduated. Well, I didn't
Oh,
graduate from it, but I went to that school.
you went to
I had a scholarship at that school. It's so funny or ironic because they wanted more Spanish, English speaking people at the school in order to make it a bilingual school. And the principal at that time was Dale Swall, and he was a Mennonite, and so he had a certain amount of um, com- confraternity, let's say, with my father. And anyhow, my family, out of 4 kids, we had 2.5 scholarships. So I went to Colegio Bolívar too, and I am tremendously grateful. It really
with the
helped
experience.
get my education going. So that later on, I left home very early. I left home the day I turned 17 because I couldn't get along with my father, and I figured either he'd kill me or I'd kill him. So um, I left
That's when you
home.
came to the States? That's when you came to the States
Yeah,
then?
and he gave me the airplane ticket to the States that I was going to repay. Later on, he said, "No, you don't have to repay because I didn't ask your brother to repay, so it wouldn't be fair." So my father was very fair. But here in the States, I wound up working on farms. So I cleaned cages for animals, fed animals, and so on. Then picked crops and then loaded trains and loaded trucks. I was a cotero, one of the most disregarded occupations that a Colombian can have in Colombia. The guy that loads the trucks with food. Um, that's one of my jobs here in the States, and and then I was, a food server and stock worker and so on. But eventually, I decided I wanted to get paid for using my head, and so I
Mm.
became a journalist, and later a teacher. So
What a journey, Marco. Like so many different things. Now, can you just dive a little further into how do you help? So you have this land, you're with the planting and the regeneration. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like how many trees do you plant or is it what is this
uh,
process that you do
I have no
in
idea
your
how
land?
many trees I've planted. Maybe 100,000.
Wow.
And I don't mean me planting them by myself, because by myself I mean I try to have a policy of plant a tree a day minimum. Um, so 30 years. But I hire people too, and sometimes, and everything comes out of my own pocket. For years, I was trying to work on this notion of the self-sustaining farm, what we called at that time the granja integral. So,
Mm-hmm.
trying to have animals, so I would have fish, grow trout, and do this and that. And I realized, yeah, I can do this if I work 24 or 26 hours a day. So
Yeah.
this is, it's pie in the sky. And Colombia is a wonderful, wonderful country for pie in the sky.
Mm.
Everybody, it's a magical quality, which uh, our compatriot Gabriel Garcia Marquez uh, was so wonderful at illustrating to the rest of the world the magical
Yes.
quality of our life,
Yes.
because we are a magical people, and and
Mm.
and and we it's a magical country. And I also find when I go to Colombia, it's like I put my foot on the ground and I start thinking of stories to write or
Mm.
poetry, and at the cabin that I built, I can sit and write poetry 2-3 hours, and my problem is that I wind up thinking in patterns that drive me nuts later. It's like I can't continue thinking in rhymes and rhythms. But
But that what you're just saying right there. Sorry to interrupt, but that the part that of when you step there and the energy that infuses within you to then be more creative goes back again to the part that you were saying about how interconnected we are.
yes,
And I've realized that, and I've asked this to other people sometimes, as well as when we travel and when we've lived in different places, we do have this sense of how these energies of these different lands do have an impact on us and our being. And the fact that it's so clear that when you step foot into, on Colombian soil, that you feel this magic and creativity just flowing through, says a lot about that interconnectedness. And probably also, honestly, uh, you've give it's like a way of, I'm gonna get emotion, with my own creativity's coming here, like of what I'm feeling, but it's like the fact that you've given to the soil, you've given it something, you're getting back also
that
something in this
that's certainly
energy.
true. That's I have no doubt. I'll tell you what. There were some people that I
Yeah,
saw. They
I
were
get chills. I got chills. I'm not kidding. I got chills. Yeah, because you're planting all you're giving it, you're taking care of it, so you're getting this energy. Sorry, go back.
well.
Can,
I wound up saying this almost by accident, and it was really a moment of enlightenment to myself, or what was it? They're called an epiphany. Um,
hmm
Somebody asked me. They were interviewing me, and they said, "Well, but how is it that you get all these trees to grow so plush, so well? They're so healthy." I said, "No. When I'm planting trees, I am the forest, and I now know that's true. I wander the forest. I wander the forest day and night, and sometimes I'll be up in the forest till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, experimenting, looking at what's out there at nighttime, and how do trees behave during the night, and not just trees, because again, everything is related. I mean, I've spent the last few years persuaded that there are certain species of fungi that are related to certain species of trees symbiotically, that they're mycorrhizae, the hair-like, the cilia of the fungi, the hair-like, almost they used to call them roots. I mean, it's funny, science used to call mushrooms plants. They're not. Um, they're a separate kingdom that has way more species than the conjunction of vegetative species and animal species, including all the invertebrates. So to be able to see the different mushrooms growing next to different kinds of species of trees. And it's been my intent, and I've actually written invitations to universities in the United States and Colombia. We need people who will come and study what these relationships are between the fungi and the trees. And specifically, because my focus is on trees that are in extreme danger of extinction. So I'll go to different parts of the forest outside of my own predio, my own 47 acres, and look for trees. And I have people that know trees way better than I do. They're natives of the mountains. They were born in those mountains themselves, not even in the city of Cali. And they, and I pay them. And so minimum wage, let's say, is 32,000 pesos a day. I say, I'll pay you 60,000. And you can go for 2 hours. You bring me back seeds of this tree, this tree, this tree. You got a day's work because you put yourself in danger. I pay people well. I believe very seriously in that. Pay on time, pay well. So I try to pay. I don't hire too many people. I hire whatever I can. I sacrifice. I don't go out to pizza here in the States because I know a pizza will provide a family of four for a week. So I can hire somebody for the money a pizza costs. And to me, that's a responsibility. It's part of who makes me who I am. It also happens to be strategically, um, I think, very functional because the people there look out after me. And I have had near-death experiences, uh, more than I wish. Uh, Years ago, before I was trained with Selwa Said in effective communication, I had guns held at my head. I got shot at. People tried to kill me, and that doesn't happen anymore. I, you know, I
Well, because you've already also opened that bridge of that aspect of what you said of even the communication component too, that now even just your interaction then with people is very
yeah,
different, and that trust and the listening and so forth. So you are one with the people. You're not just this gringo anymore
yeah.
living on
There
their land.
again. There's irony because
Yeah.
in a sense I am. I mean, I'm. My friends in Ponce call me grindio.
Grindio, like yeah, which is India with
Yeah,
gringo.
yeah.
That's
So
awesome. Native
yeah,
and
because I mean I don't look like anybody. I mean, once in a while
Mhm.
somebody will call me paisa or paisita or something like that. But which is because if I go to Yarumal, Antioquia, everybody looks like me, except
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they all have a ruana, a carriel, a machete, y una
Right,
caneca
yeah.
de aguardiente.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're the Caucasian version of you. Yeah, you could look like the Caucasian version of Colombianos. Yeah, it's like my dad being American Italian when he lived
Hmm,
in Colombia. The same my dad could pass for. I mean, his accent was not. He didn't grow up there, so his
yeah.
accent's not as good. So when he'd speak, then yes, you'd know he was. I mean, and my dad listens to this podcast. My dad's probably my biggest fan, so he'll be listening
Well,
to this.
good for him.
He'll want to be yeah, he'll be wanting like to even know your email address and like, oh, I want to hear more. I want to know if he knows so and so and so and so that went to school at that time. So believe me,
You
you'll
know
you'll
what?
be hearing probably from my
He
dad.
would probably be completely right. I probably do
Yeah,
know a
and you
lot.
are. You probably do. When we finish recording, I'll ask you for a few names as well and see if you know them. But
Okay.
we're going to be wrapping it up, but we could probably go on as we mentioned before for hours. But we did accomplish the goal of touching the two priorities right now in your life, which were the parenting component and the communication, and as well the regeneration of the forest. And I thank you so much for doing, and it really did give me chills that part of of that you were talking about symbiotic. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Sorry, you talked about the symbiotic that happens in nature and the mushrooms and the trees, and then the fact that you are one with that land
Yeah.
too, and that like that you are the forest. I mean, it's just such beautiful imagery and really yeah, I'm going to take a lot from that, because I'm one of those that has no green thumb yet.
That's okay.
um
I got 10 of them.
yeah, so I'm gonna have to learn from that aspect of, of being able to grow something, knowing that is just, I'm looking here on my little, even my little, what are these called, the ones that are supposed to be okay with little water, even those end up dying in my home. I feel so
Oh,
sad. So
what they call the dumb canes. Yeah.
yeah, I'll show you. You see, even these
Oh
little
my
ones like
goodness.
that. You
Oh,
see, even
succulents.
these, this, even the succulents
Okay,
die in my house.
I won't tell you about my succulents. I,
Oh gosh, I'm sure
I
yours
rent
are.
a 2-bedroom house here in Pacific Grove is the name of the
Uh,
township,
yeah.
and 4 of us live here. My ex-wife, 2 of my kids, and myself. And so my ex-wife has one room, I have the other room. It was meant to be a room for my son and I, who shared a room for 17 years. So
Oh.
guess why we talk to each other all the time. To me, the greatest honor a parent can have is for a child to come and say, uh, "Mom or Dad, I need somebody to talk to. Could you listen to
Mm,
me?
mm,
Yeah, I got to get something off my chest." And what an honor, and it's anything, anything. And my kids are all
uh,
in their 20s, so it is anything. and
wow.
and also, if I'm messing up, if I'm making a mistake, Dad, I want to talk to you about this activity. It's impacting me.
Uh,
And I can acknowledge it and say, thank you for giving me the opportunity to change something that needs changing. And even learning how to apologize for goofing up for a child, with a child, is I learned to say, oh, that didn't come out right.
yep.
i
Yep.
i, I wish I hadn't said it that way. I wonder if there's an opportunity, if you'd give me an opportunity to express it differently. I have never been told no,
Mm,
not once. Children are so resilient. And when they're honored, they know instinctively how to honor back and say, sure, go ahead, give it another try. And that means they get to go back and give it another try. You know,
yes, and that's the honoring that we. It's okay to honor and to stand. It's okay to admit we're wrong. That part, it's okay to admit we are wrong, even as a parent, to know and to be able to. That takes, that again is that aspect of, like you're saying, it's not about our own ego. It's about allowing them to also be able to learn to admit when they're wrong in the
yeah.
future. It's a lesson that we give them. So
The
yeah,
same
I
even
love
goes with my neighbors in Ponce, because I was the ecologist, right? I was the guy that was not going to allow trees to be cut down any further. And meanwhile, my neighbors, when I went there, uh, I was the first not from there to buy. So I was un recién llegado. And now I'm still a recién llegado, but there are new generations that have come in, let's say, the last 10 to 20 years. And so the older people, the pioneers, one, I've gone back and said, I did not start out right with you guys.
that. Mm,
I was imposing. I have a different, I know you and I have different ethics about the forest, and I want to express my respect to you. And uh, I also want to express my desire to be supportive of you with any need you have.
mm.
And and I'm sorry I didn't start out better with you. I'd like the opportunity to develop a good relationship with you, the respect. And I'll tell you, people are very welcoming. You know,
So beautiful. So many, so many. lessons for us to take from this conversation. Thank you, Marco. Thank you so much. And so, for people to want to get a hold of you, is it okay if what would you like me to share your email below, or what if people want to learn more about either of these topics,
Yeah,
or how
I'd
they can
say,
also make a change in their lives?
yeah, my desire is to communicate with people, to pass on the baton to the next
Mm-hmm.
generation. And that's a whole nother discussion, because the greatest courage that I get today is from the younger generation. Many people who are in their 20s, 30s, early 40s who really want to do, they want to add to what I'm doing, and uh, very spirited. In my own life, my own hopefulness has declined as I have watched that no matter how much I plant, so much more gets cut down every day. And I sometimes think that well, I think we're on the verge of a global collapse, global social collapse, and catastrophic, and that it might actually already be too late.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to act as if it's too late. I'm not going to get off this conversation and go get drunk and, and and sob in my beer about how it's too late. No, I'm going to go plant some more trees
Mm-hmm.
and embrace young people who want to uh, make make the world livable,
Mm-hmm.
uh, with or without
Yeah,
us.
it's about taking control of the things that are in our control,
Yeah,
and not, yeah, taking action in those. So thank you once again. And I'm sure you'll be getting some people getting in touch with you to learn more about these ways in which they can create this positive impact in the world around them and with the people around them as well. So gracias.
con mucho gusto.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.